Um, he studied he studies the demography of immigrants, both worldwide immigration trends and also US immigration, as well as the integration of immigrants into American society. He also studies generational dynamics, racial method categorization, and census undercount. So lots of things that are important to the people in this room. Today he's going to speak on his work estimating flows of unauthorized migrants. And his presentation is called Estimates of Unauthorized Immigrants, Methods, Data, and Assumptions. Thanks so much for being here, Jeff. I will turn it over to you.
Thank you very much. I was hoping to be there in person, but alas, was unable to make it. The first business is about my organization. They make me put it in, so it's there. And this is one of our most recent publications. My talk today is going to be, I think, a little different from the last one. I'm going to talk basically about how we and I make our estimates of both the numbers of unauthorized immigrants and what we do to develop data on the characteristics of the immigrants. And I'm going to talk a lot about fairly detailed methods in the hopes that if you decide you want to do some research on this, it may help you out. And some simplifications you might make in order to not have to go through all of the rigmarole that we do. So first I'm going to talk about how we estimate the number of unauthorized immigrants, the so-called residual method. There's some details in the handout, and I'll be glad to provide more if people want, but this is kind of a broad 30,000-foot view of what we do. I have to figure out how to move this stuff now. There you go. I'm going to talk next about who is unauthorized and who is authorized, who is a lawful immigrant. This is important. These days, there's a growing number of people that are part of our unauthorized immigrant population estimates that are actually known to the government and are in contact with the government. Some of these acronyms may be familiar: DACA, TPS, people in asylum backlogs. These numbers have grown substantially in recent years, and some of the data I'm going to talk about for the future shows they're growing even more. And then what we do is, after we make our estimates, we go into the microdata. This is mainly the American Community Survey. We try to identify the legal status of the specific individuals in the microdata as citizens, legal temporary migrants, refugees, people who we're fairly certain are legal immigrants, and then who are the potential unauthorized in there, and how we choose which ones we tag as unauthorized. And then finally, how this could be approximated, perhaps, by you or other users. But first, just a little background. The unauthorized immigrant in the population in the US grew rapidly, about 500,000 a year from 1990 to 2007. It went up to a little over 12 million and was a major policy concern throughout this. And 500,000 growth in the population is not insignificant. Then in 2007, things changed dramatically. Largely due to the Great Recession and the collapse of the housing market and the US economy. Excuse me. The numbers dropped by 500,000 a year for 2 years, losing 1 million off of this by 2009. Then things settled down. Over the next decade, 2009 to 2019, the numbers kind of slowly drifted down, and the numbers dropped by about 1 million over a decade. And yet it was a major political concern during this time, but the numbers kept shrinking. That has changed. The most recent data we published is 2021. I'm showing you our forthcoming estimate for 2022. So the numbers have gone up from the low of 10.2 million to about 11 million right now. This is kind of mid 2022, so it predates a lot of the apprehensions at the border and the growth in that population. We have some other indications, and I'll talk about it some, that suggest the numbers are going up rapidly, and the next estimates from when we get the next data are probably going to be a good deal higher. So what we do is we make this residual estimate, which is basically the survey data minus an estimate of lawful immigrants, which we build up from administrative data. We make adjustments for undercount. We then go into the microdata and assign legal status to individuals. We create a number of different legal statuses. We use a probabilistic multiple imputation model, and I use that term loosely. You'll see later, for both the lawful and unauthorized. And then we finally make some adjustments, and that gives us a data set that we can use to tabulate and answer questions about where do they live, where do they come from, what are their households like, how many are enrolled in school, how many children are there of these unauthorized immigrants, and a whole host of things which are in the articles we've published. The residual method is conceptually fairly simple. You take the total number of immigrants in the survey and subtract an estimate of the lawful immigrant population. And this is widely used. Pew's been publishing data since 2005. I was at the Urban Institute and the Census Bureau before and used similar methods. Jenny Van Hook, who you're going to hear from, and Jim Bachmeyer use a similar methodology. The Department of Homeland Security has published estimates from 2005 to 22. Bob Warren at the Center for Migration Studies has published estimates. All of the numbers are in a similar range. We're all using similar assumptions and similar data sets. They vary a little bit, but not widely. And again, it's a simple equation. And I use the term immigrants here. The unauthorized counted is the number of immigrants counted minus the lawful immigrants. There's a population of foreign-born population that we don't consider part of the immigrant population. These are legal temporary migrants. And the way we handle it as Pew is we take them out of the survey. These are people here on student visas, temporary work visas, H-1B, J visas like visiting professors, foreign diplomats, and so forth. And so by taking them out of the survey, we can focus on the immigrant population here. So who are the lawful immigrants? Well, the lawful immigrants are the people we put into our estimates. And the main group are people who arrive with green cards, legal permanent residents. The Department of Homeland Security and its predecessor, the Immigration Naturalization Service, provide annual data, annual counts of this. People who arrive as refugees are part of the legal population. They come from mainly at this point the State Department. People who get approved for asylum get added to the lawful immigrant population. And finally, there's a large group of people getting legal permanent residence who have been in the country on various temporary visas and they adjust their status. So we add them in at the point where they adjust, but they go into different years. There are a variety of smaller categories that we add when we get the data. And a big group, G here, are the people who were legalized under the Immigration Reform and Control Act around 1990. They had to be added to the population at that point. And finally, basically, we assume that anyone who came to the US before 1982 or 1980 is legal because they could have legalized under the 1990 Act. So what we do is year by year, we add in the new lawful immigrants. We take the population from the previous year, allow for mortality, immigration, and we put in state-to-state movement to estimate the legal population. So the unauthorized then are the people who aren't part of this population. They are not part of the lawful immigrant population. One of the policy concerns is, did people overstay visas or did they cross the border illegally? We can't really tell that from our data because it's not asked in the survey. We used to infer that people who came from nearby countries were probably clandestine entrants, and people who came from far away were probably visa overstayers. That's not as good an assumption these days when we look at the people apprehended at the southern border who are now coming from all over the world. Before 2010, this population was dominated by Mexican and Central Americans who were likely clandestine entrants. Throughout the 2010s, most of the new unauthorized immigrants were people who likely overstayed visas. Today, it seems like most are illegal border crossers. And the distinction here is one of enforcement priorities, not necessarily demographic or socioeconomic. There are a large number who are actually in what we've been calling quasi-legal categories. What used to be the largest of these are the DACA recipients. These are deferred action for childhood arrivals. This was an Obama initiative that allowed people brought as children to, the goal was to get them legal status. They're now in this quasi-legal status. Initially, there were about 700,000 of these. As of the end of 23, there were a little over 500,000. So I'm focusing on two dates. The July 22 date is the most recent estimates we have, and December 23 is the most current data. It's a status called temporary protected status to allow people for whom it's too dangerous for them to go home, give them an ability to work in the United States and not be deported. Most were Central Americans. The big surge here is mainly Venezuelans. So now there's over 1 million of these, 1.2 million. As recently as July 22, it was about 600,000. This change doesn't represent new people entering the United States. It's a change of status for people who are already here. So a lot of these people have been here 20, 25 years now. People who claim asylum are not deportable. They're known to the authorities, but they can't be deported until their cases have been decided. Affirmative asylum applicants are people who come forward to claim asylum. They're processed by Homeland Security. There's about 1.6 million people in the backlog now. As recently as July 22, it was 700,000. So these do represent almost 900,000 new additions to the unauthorized immigrant population. Defensive asylum applicants are people who claim asylum so that they won't be deported. and they're processed by the Department of Justice. There's, again, over 1 million people in the backlogs here. The growth hasn't been as large, but again, it's a large number. The Biden administration instituted a new set of paroles for people from Cuba, Haiti, Nicaragua, Venezuela. It was a way of bypassing the illegal entrant process and to keep the number of asylum claims down. It started basically full bore going in January 23. It allows about 30,000 people a month from these 4 countries total to come to the United States. They are not admitted as permanent residents, but they are part of our unauthorized immigrant population. This has added about 320,000 people to the unauthorized immigrant population recently. And then there's a variety of smaller categories, people who've applied for legal permanent residence, but are waiting for the decisions to be made. Most of these are small, but the U visas for victims of criminal activity that backlog has grown, and there are about 350,000. So if you put all these together, with 3.2 million people in these quasi-legal categories when our estimate was 11 million, so it's about 28% of the total. But if you look at what's happened since mid-2022, the numbers have grown by almost 2 million. So this is what I say, we expect our new estimates when we get newer data to show a significant increase in the unauthorized immigrant population. So I'm going to walk through the status assignments. I'm going to do this fairly quickly. This is when we go into the microdata in the ACS, and you can do it with the current population survey as well. The way we do it, we have a set of estimates that we made by country of birth, by state, by adults and children that we use to control how many people are selected for the assignments. And then we can use them to tabulate and work on our final estimates. So the first thing we do before we even make our estimates is assign people as lawful temporary immigrants. And here I list a bunch of the categories. The big ones are the students and the guest workers of various kinds. There are some smaller categories. What we do with this is we look at the data from the ACS and the CPS about when the people came in, what kind of job they have, other characteristics of the household, who they're married to, are they on various programs, are they veterans? And if they appear to meet the criteria for the visa, we call them lawful temporary immigrants, lawful temporary migrants, and don't put them into our estimates. The refugee flows to the United States tend to be very concentrated. They tend to be from specific countries at specific times, and initially we don't get many other migrants from there. So we got a lot of Vietnamese refugees in the early 80s. We're currently getting people from Bhutan, from Afghanistan. We've gotten them from Sudan, from Somalia. So what we do is we look at the country of birth and year of immigration. If that aligns with refugee flows, we tag the people as refugees. The ACS asks people if they're citizens. So if they are truly naturalized citizens, then they are legally in the country. To become a naturalized citizen, with a few exceptions, you have to have been in the US for 6 years or more. So people who report that they haven't been in the country 6 years, if they're not married to an American citizen, we say, nope, you say you're a citizen, but you're not. Based on some other research, we found that the reporting is really quite accurate for countries other than Mexico and Central America. So those people we accept as definitely legal. If people are from Mexico and Central America, we put the final decision on hold, and we may make them naturalized citizens later, but we may also make them unauthorized immigrants. So our definitely legal group includes all these people who entered before 82. We then look at occupations that people have and who they're working for. And there are a host of occupations that and employers that basically you need to be legally in the United States. And I can provide more detail if you want this, but basically we go through and tag people for that. If you're getting TANF, if you're getting supplemental security income, if you're enrolled in the government programs, in most places you have to be legally in the US. And most family members of lawful immigrants are lawful immigrants. So the people who are left then are the potential unauthorized immigrants. And what we do here is we have a set of demographic targets, and we randomly select from the potential unauthorized immigrants those who are that we tag as unauthorized. We do this, first of all, we do a multiple imputation. We create replicate households and use those so we can build in the probabilities that way. Our initial probabilities for assigning people are basically the targets that we have, the demographic targets, divided by the potential unauthorized immigrants. And we go through, we do parents and non-parents separately so we can align children. And then we edit the data and we iterate, we adjust the probabilities and do some iterations on this until we hit our targets. The potential unauthorized immigrant population tends to be 5 to 15% larger than the targets. So the probabilities are not very sensitive to these adjustments. And we go through until we get the numbers we think are right. So, like I said, it takes a while to do this. We have to build up the population estimates. We have to get our targets. We have to clean the data. It has seemed to me, and I get requests on, well, how can I do this? What can I do, from people who are doing research to look at the role of unauthorized immigrants as distinct from the legal immigrant population. So I think there are some useful ways to approximate this. The first thing I would do is I've got these reversed. The first thing I would do is to go through and try to pull out from the data set the people who appear to be legal temporary residents. This is fairly straightforward. These are people who are short-term residents. These are people in specific occupations. These are people who are enrolled in college and haven't been here very long. These are people who are in families where there are not, the family units tend to be other people who are legal temporary residents, possibly some US born children, young US born children. And again, I'll be glad to share my specifications on this if anybody wants to try this. Assigning refugees, again, is fairly straightforward. It's a list of countries of birth and periods of entry. And basically people who came from Bhutan in certain time periods are almost certainly here as refugees, for example. So that's a fairly easy set of edits to do to the data. Again, the lawful immigrants, people who've been here before 82, people who are naturalized citizens, people in specific occupations, industries, and getting specific government programs tend to be virtually certain to be lawful immigrants. So that leaves the potential unauthorized then. One option for analysis is just to analyze the people that we think are potentially unauthorized. Another option would be to simulate the kinds of random assignments that we do at Pew and that other people do in developing their data sets. Rather than making your own estimates for the total number of unauthorized immigrants, one could go to the published data. We publish data. DHS publishes data. Migration Policy Institute publishes data. So it's possible to get some totals by either states or groups of states or countries, regions of birth, and use them to help select, identify the people who are likely to be unauthorized immigrants in the data set. So this is one approach that researchers who don't want to actually build the very complex models and do the estimates that we do. So with that, I thank you for your attention. I'll be glad to answer any questions. My contact information is on the handout, and feel free to send me any questions you might have that I can't answer here, or to call if you want to talk through some problems you have. And I thank you for your attention.
So you provide kind of a abbreviated workflow at the end of your presentation. I was wondering if you had any intuition or perhaps numbers on how closely this abbreviated workflow would mirror the estimates that you would get from a policy think tank like yours.
Well, I like I said, I think the kind of framework there is going to give a somewhat larger potential unauthorized immigrant population than the numbers that we're estimating, on the order of probably 15 to 20% larger. So, you know, if you do the kinds of screening that I'm talking about doing here, you end up with, instead of 11 million, you'd probably end up with 12.5 to 13 million. And I might add, our numbers actually are adjusted for undercounts. So the survey weights would, you know, you would get numbers. In other words, we estimate 11 million, but if you use the survey weights, it's a little closer to 10 million than 11 million.
We're right on time, but if someone has a burning question. Otherwise, we're right on time. Thank you so much, Jeff. Really appreciate it.